As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the village, the bustling streets began to slow. The day's end brought a familiar routine, but a voice suddenly pierced through the fading light. "Everyone, hurry back to your homes. It's getting dark." The warning came from a man beating a drum, his voice tense with urgency. He paused only to add, "The night is dangerous. Make sure you burn incense and lock your doors tightly. Don't let the old black snake into your homes." The crowd grew uneasy, whispers spreading like wildfire. The man continued, his tone grim. 2 days ago, the black snake devoured 2 men at the mountain temple, one of them a Taoist. Fear rippled through the villagers. Although the snake hadn't attacked anyone from the village recently, chickens and ducks had been vanishing. No one wanted to risk losing anything more. Quickly, people gathered their belongings, ready to retreat. Meanwhile, just outside the village, at the base of the mountain temple, a father and his young son were busy collecting herbs. The boy glanced at his father and asked, "Can we bring our chickens inside when we get back? I don't want the black snake to eat them." His father nodded, thinking of how much they'd already lost. "We'll bring them in right away. Can't afford to lose any more." With their baskets full, the pair hoisted them onto their shoulders and began their journey back to the village. But as they left, unseen within the shadows of the mountain temple, someone, or rather, something, was listening. The old black snake, coiled around the ancient statue inside the temple. The black snake's cold, gleaming eyes followed the retreating figures. It had heard everything the villagers were saying, and something stirred within it. "They must be talking about me," it thought. But why were they calling it old and scary? As it slithered around the temple's walls and pillars, memories began to surface. The 2 men the villagers mentioned, they had been eaten by the snake. It remembered well. 2 days ago, it had watched from the shadows as a man, terrified and desperate, had rushed into the temple, calling for help. Behind him, a Taoist priest chased after him, fury in his eyes. The snake hadn't understood their words at the time, but it had observed enough to sense the danger. The priest had been cultivating the man as some sort of resource, a human pellet meant to enhance his own power. But the man had escaped, having consumed precious herbs, and the priest couldn't allow him to get away. As the man reached the temple's altar, he collapsed before the statue, his hands trembling as he prayed for salvation. His cries filled the silent temple. The snake, unable to comprehend the language, only saw the man's anguish. It had sensed his suffering and, in an odd way, felt pity for him. Wanting to offer him peace, the black snake did what it thought was merciful. It swallowed him whole. Some time after the black snake had devoured the man, another figure entered the temple. This time, it was an older Taoist, his eyes scanning the shadows. He had witnessed the man being swallowed by the snake and was furious. "I've cultivated him for 10 years. Spit him out at once." The snake, now coiled lazily around the statue, blinked at the Taoist, puzzled. It couldn't understand why this man was shouting. Is he in pain too? The snake wondered. Perhaps he, too, needs peace. And just like before, the black snake made a swift decision. With a fluid motion, it lunged forward and swallowed the Taoist whole, thinking it was doing the right thing, reuniting both master and disciple in a final, peaceful embrace. At the time, the snake didn't dwell much on its actions. It wasn't driven by malice but by instinct, a desire to ease what it saw as suffering. But as it digested its meal, something changed. The world around the snake seemed to sharpen, to come into focus. A rush of energy surged through it, and for the first time, the snake felt aware. It had developed a demonic core, and with it came intelligence. The black snake now saw the world in a new light, full of danger, complexity, and mystery. Memories began flooding back. One stood out clearly, a time when it had been hunted by humans, men in black robes. The snake had narrowly escaped, its heart pounding in fear, but at the time, it hadn't understood who they were or why they were chasing it. Now, with its newfound intelligence, it realized they were from a snake-catching sect. It also recalled witnessing these same hunters capturing and killing a massive flower python. Humans were dangerous and cultivators. Those who practiced mystical arts were even more terrifying. With this new awareness, the black snake came to understand the power structure of the human world. Cultivators could increase their strength through training, ascending through stages like chi refining, foundation establishment, core formation, and eventually the nascent soul stage, where they could manipulate the very forces of heaven and earth. The snake realized how fortunate it had been to survive those earlier encounters, Mere luck had saved it from the snake catchers. Now, fully aware of the threat humans posed, the snake resolved to avoid them whenever possible. Killing humans, it decided, was far too risky. Instead, it turned to easier prey, chickens and ducks from the nearby villages. For a while, this strategy worked. The poultry kept it fed, and the villagers were none the wiser. But recently, even that wasn't enough. The snake's stomach growled, empty despite the chickens it had stolen. It was getting harder to sneak into the village unnoticed, and the meager poultry wasn't satisfying anymore. As it slithered around the temple, the snake thought of its options. It needed more food, something larger and more filling. Then it remembered a conversation it had overheard earlier. A villager had mentioned a wealthy family in Chenjia town raising pigs. Pigs. The thought excited the snake. That should do the trick, it mused. Without wasting any time, it decided to head toward the town. As the snake prepared to leave the temple, something caught its eye. Its gaze settled on a painting that had been etched into the temple's walls, depicting a legendary tale of love and fate. The black snake stared at it for a moment and remembered something. Humans often gave themselves names, symbols of their identity and purpose. It glanced back at the story painted on the wall, the tale of Su Xian, a human who had fallen in love with a snake spirit. The villagers kept calling him Old Black Snake. But now, the snake felt it was time to give itself a proper name, something meaningful. After a moment of thought, it made its decision. The black snake would call itself Su Hei. With that, Su Hei slithered into the gathering dusk, heading toward Chenjia town. Night had fallen in Chenjia town. The village was quiet, its inhabitants resting behind closed doors, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Su Hei slithered silently through the village, his gaze sharp as he scanned his surroundings. After carefully inspecting the area, his eyes landed on his prize, the pig's den. The sight of the plump pigs, unaware of his presence, made Su Hei's mouth water. He raised his head, checking for any sign of humans. All was still. With no one around, Su Hei wasted no time. He opened his jaws and swallowed the first pig in a single gulp. Suddenly, one of the pigs squealed, startled by the presence of the giant snake. It dashed away, squeaking in fear. Su Hei tensed. He couldn't afford to make noise and risk waking the humans. Fixing his gaze on the fleeing pig, he lunged forward and devoured it before it could alert anyone. Satisfied but cautious, Su Hei continued his feast, gulping down several more pigs. With his belly now full, he let out a soft burp and glanced at his bulging body. Did I eat too much? He wondered, feeling slightly sluggish. Still, he had time before the humans awoke, so he decided to rest a while, letting his body digest the meal. An hour passed in the quiet of the night, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional grunt from the remaining pigs. Su Hei, nestled comfortably in the pig den, felt at ease. But his peace was short-lived. Suddenly, voices broke the silence. Su Hei's body tensed, and his eyes snapped open. He slithered up the wooden pillar of the den, hiding himself in the shadows of the roof beams. Below, he saw several figures approaching the pig den. Two men, both wearing grim expressions, carried a lifeless body. One of them, dressed in brown robes, tossed the corpse into the den. Chen Fan has stopped breathing, he muttered. The second man, in blue robes, scoffed, his voice cold. Good riddance. He was worthless. Better that he's dead. The two men glanced around the den briefly. The man in brown furrowed his brow, noticing the pigs seemed fewer than before, but he shrugged it off. Without a second thought, they turned and left, disappearing into the night. As the men left, Su Hei lowered his head from his hiding spot, peeking down at the body that had been thrown in. He knew enough about human customs to recognize that death often brought misfortune. Feeling uneasy, he decided it might be time to leave. But just as he prepared to move, something strange happened. The corpse's eyes shot open. Su Hei's entire body trembled. The dead man slowly sat up, his movements deliberate. A zombie? Su Hei thought, fear creeping into his mind. He watched closely as the man, Chen Fan, rose to his knees, wiping the blood from his face. Then, to Su Hei's shock, the man started laughing, loudly and maniacally. Suddenly, a burst of spiritual energy erupted from Chen Fan's body, swirling around him like a storm. Su Hei's instinct screamed at him to flee, but he stayed frozen, mesmerized by the scene unfolding before him. This wasn't the Chen Fan who had just died. An immortal soul had taken over the body, and this new Chen Fan radiated power. The immortal's eyes glowed with intensity as he delved into the original Chen Fan's memories, uncovering the tragic life he had led. Betrayed, broken, and ridiculed, Chun Fan had lived a life of misery, his engagement ruined and his dantian, a vital source of power, destroyed. As the immortal soul processed these memories, his eyes blazed with fury. He clenched his fists, his voice low but filled with conviction. Since I have taken over this body, I will avenge its former owner. I will not spare a single person who wronged him. They will all pay. Suhei, still hidden above, watched in disbelief. Who was he talking to? He wondered. Chun Fan slowly stood up, inspecting the damaged state of his newly claimed body. The injuries were severe. If the immortal soul hadn't taken over, Chun Fan would already be dead. His tattered body barely held together, but the immortal had no intention of letting it go to waste. Meanwhile, Suhei, still hiding in the rafters, watched uneasily. His instincts told him to leave, and just as he began to retreat, Chun Fan glanced upward, locking eyes with the snake. Suhei froze, terror surging through him. I've been spotted. Panic gripped the snake. He had heard Chun Fan speak of being an immortal. What if he's part of the snake-catching sect? Suhei's mind raced. If he's a snake catcher, I'm dead for sure. I have to act fast. Chun Fan, however, barely gave the snake a second thought. To him, Suhei was merely a low-level spirit beast, not worth his attention. He sat down on the floor in a lotus stance, focusing on healing his battered body. A mere snake, he muttered under his breath. I can scare it off with a bit of spiritual energy if need be. As Chun Fan began his meditation, yellow spiritual energy started to gather around him, swirling faster and faster. Suddenly, the energy exploded outward, forming a majestic dragon that roared as it spiraled above him. From the dragon's form emerged a cauldron, engraved with the images of countless beasts. Chun Fan's eyes lit up with a gleam of recognition. Laughing, he marveled at his luck. The demon god cauldron. I didn't know it would reincarnate with me. This supreme treasure of the demon race had followed him into this new life, and with it, his ambition soared. He was unstoppable. But up above, Suhei was watching the spectacle unfold in horror. To him, the swirling energy, the dragon, and the mysterious cauldron could mean only one thing. This guy is casting a spell to capture me. His scales began to sweat as fear took hold. He's going to kill me. He's going to roast me and use my skin. And what if he demands compensation for all the pigs I ate? His mind spun, imagining all the terrible fates that awaited him. He had to act, and fast. Down below, Chun Fan, still immersed in his meditation, raised his hand, muttering a mantra under his breath. A sinister smile curled on his lips as his mind filled with grand visions of conquest. Now that I'm reborn, I will take this world for myself. But just as Chun Fan became lost in his thoughts, Suhei's fear reached its peak. The snake launched himself from his hiding spot, charging at Chun Fan from behind, his jaw stretched wide open. In one massive, desperate bite, Suhei swallowed Chun Fan whole, his enormous body crashing through the pig den and sending the structure crumbling to the ground. Without pausing to consider what he'd just done, Suhei turned and bolted out of the village, his body pulsing with adrenaline and terror. He had no idea what sort of wrath Chun Fan might unleash from inside him, or if he could survive it, but one thing was clear. He needed to get as far away as possible and fast. Inside Suhei's belly, Chun Fan was stuck, his body drenched in the snake's digestive fluids. Fury filled his veins as he realized the insult. A lowly spirit beast had dared to devour him. I gave it a chance to flee, Chun Fan muttered through clenched teeth, but it asked for death. Summoning his strength, Chun Fan clenched his fist and unleashed a powerful punch from within. The blow struck Suhei's insides like thunder, causing the snake to let out a piercing screech. Blood spewed from Suhei's mouth, and his belly rippled with the force of Chun Fan's attacks. Suhei, writhing in pain, suddenly realized with horror that Chun Fan was still alive inside him. Worse yet, the immortal was casting spells, slowly tearing apart his body from within. Desperately, Suhei tried to shake the invader out, but Chun Fan continued his relentless assault, widening the gap inside the snake's belly. After a fierce struggle, Chun Fan finally made his way to Suhei's demonic core, buried deep within the snake's body. Suhei's trembling grew more violent as Chun Fan's hand neared the core, his fear reaching its peak. With a cold, focused gaze, Chun Fan raised his hand toward the purple core, pouring his spiritual energy into it. Cracks began to form on the surface, and Suhei's eyes widened in terror. As the spiritual energy from the core started leaking, Chun Fan greedily absorbed it, draining the snake's life force. The cracks deepened, until with one final surge, the core shattered. Suhei screamed in agony, his body thrashing wildly as blood poured from his mouth. The damage was catastrophic. His body began to tear itself apart from the inside, and in his frantic struggle, a tree branch pierced his skull. In that moment, the light faded from Suhei's eyes. As he collapsed to the ground, his thoughts raced in disbelief. Why must I die like this? I gained intelligence, formed a demonic core, but regret filled his heart and tears welled in his eyes. He cursed his decision to come to the village, then slipped into unconsciousness. Inside the snake's ruined body, Chen Fan, now severely drained of spiritual energy, began to devour Suhei's flesh, desperate to replenish his strength. The black snake's meat, rich with spiritual power, was exactly what he needed. As he consumed more of it, a sudden surge of energy erupted beneath his feet. The demon god cauldron, linked to Chun Fan's divine consciousness, appeared on its own. Chun Fan extended his hand toward the cauldron, attempting to retrieve it. But before he could, the cauldron unleashed an enormous burst of energy, heading straight for Suhei's shattered core. Blinded by the light, Chun Fan shielded his eyes as the cauldron began to absorb the fragments of the core. Golden energy began to radiate from the cauldron, and to Chun Fan's shock, it coalesced into a massive spiritual dragon. The dragon's eyes opened, brimming with an intense power. Confusion filled Chun Fan's mind. The demon god cauldron. Why is it helping Suhei? He muttered in disbelief. Could it be that Suhei was no ordinary spirit beast? Before Chun Fan could comprehend the situation, the spiritual dragon roared, releasing an overwhelming surge of energy. Chun Fan's body convulsed in agony as the energy enveloped him, tearing him apart. His screams echoed as his form began to disintegrate under the golden light. Outside, Suhei's lifeless body glowed with the same golden energy, pouring out from his mouth, eyes, and wounds. The village remained eerily silent as the snake's enormous form started to break down into dust. Chun Fan's body was consumed entirely by the spiritual energy, disappearing into the ether. Hours passed. As the sun rose, its light illuminated the scene. Both Chun Fan and Suhei had vanished, their remains scattered like ashes. But something remarkable happened in the aftermath. From the disintegrated remnants of Suhei's body, a small snake began to take shape. Suhei, reborn, lay unconscious. His tiny body, now a fraction of his former size, was still and weak, tears glistening in his eyes. Yet, in the reflection of his tear-filled gaze, the shadow of the golden dragon that had devoured Chun Fan flickered, hinting at a new beginning that neither Suhei nor the world could have anticipated.